Hello, in this lesson 3.8 we're going to solve problems with percentages. We're going to use something called the percent proportion formula. And it's really great because it helps us to solve for unknown values when we're dealing with percent problems. And it's foolproof. You can use this percent proportion formula to solve all percent problems. So is to of, part is to whole, as percent is to 100. So on this proportion, we're always going to have a percentage side. Usually it's shown on the right, but it doesn't matter. You could have it on the left. And then on the other side, we have the part and the whole. So as we read problems, we can put the numbers in the correct position and solve for our unknown. Let's take a look at example 1. In this question, it's asking us to find 30% of 40. So what we can do is we can solve this problem not necessarily using a proportion. There are other methods too, but the percent proportion is a good one to practice. I'm going to just talk to you about the multiplication method. This method works well for a question like this, where we're trying to find a percentage of a certain amount. Doesn't work so great when we have other unknowns. So if we're looking at 30% of 40, we can change the 30% to a decimal. Now we learned how to change percentages to a decimal by dividing by 100 or moving our decimal 2 places to the left. So as a decimal, 30% is 0.3. We know the word of means multiplication. We've seen this in the past. So this is the multiplication method. We can take 0.3 and multiply it by 40, and that's going to give us 12. And that's just one way we can solve this problem. We could actually do things even differently than this. We could think, well, 10% of 40 is 4, so 20% is 8, and 30% is 12. So there's ways we can come to the answer of 12. And those ways are good, but if we want to use the proportion, we're always going to be able to match things up. So for our proportion, on one side is going to be the percentage. So what we want to know is we want to know 30% out of the 100. So on the percent side, we always have our percentage laid out. And if we don't know our percentage, then that's what we're going to be solving for. Here we know we want 30% of 40. If we look at that of, that is in the denominator position. So we are going to put the 40, because we want to know the part of 40 that is 30%. So the 40 goes down below, that's our whole, and we want to solve for the part. And now we have a proportion where we can cross multiply and divide. So we can take 40 times 30, which is 1,200, and then we can divide by 100. So we can cross multiply and divide, getting the answer of 12. So x, or 30% of 40, is equal to 12. For example 2, it says 65% of some number is 130. What is the number? So these questions without a strategy can be quite daunting. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up our percent proportion. We're going to fill in the information that we know and look for where our x is going to be. So it says 65% of some number. Well, we know we have the percentage. When we see the percentage, we can confidently fill out the percent side of our proportion, 65 over 100. That 100 doesn't change because that reflects percentages. So that part is done. Now it says 65% of some number is 130. If we look at our proportion, is to of, as percent is to 100. So what we don't know is the of. Of some number, we don't know. is 130. So we are looking for a number that is going to be bigger than 130 because 130 is 65% of it. So we can read carefully and we can fill in the missing information based on what we read. Of some number goes in the denominator, our missing number, is 130 goes in the numerator position. Now we can solve for x. We can cross multiply and divide. We can take 100 times 130, which is going to give us 13,000. And then we can divide by 65. We can also solve this algebraically isolating x, as I've shown in previous videos. We can take the 13,000, divide by 65, and that will give us x. And that is 200. And that makes sense based on what we're looking at. X is equal to 200. 130 over 200 is equal to 65% over 100. And that really works because 200 is double of 100 and 130 is double of 65. So we have a perfect proportion. We were able to solve using the percent proportion. For example 3, this time they're asking us what percent of 50 is 75. So we don't know the percent this time, so that's going to be our unknown. And then if we look at of 50 is 75, we can set up our percent proportion. So we're going to set it up. We don't know the percent is our x. What percent? I don't know, so I'm going to put that there. And it says what percent of 50, 50 goes in the of position, is 75. 75 goes in the is position, the part. Now you may be wondering, well, 75 is greater than 50. That's an improper fraction. Well, that's very true, but we can have percentages that are greater than 100%, and that's what we're going to get here when we solve. This time I'm going to show the solving algebraically, so it's always good to use algebra where we can. So 50 times x, so we cross multiply, 50 times x is equal to 75 times 100. So 50x is equal to 7,500. Now we can divide because we want to isolate x. So we're still cross multiplying and dividing. We're doing everything just a little bit slower, but also really getting comfortable with the idea of isolating that x. So that makes x isolated. 7,500 divided by 50 equals 150%. And that makes sense because 75 is greater than 50, so our percentage is going to be greater than 100. Let's try some questions on the do together. Number 1, 20% of what number is 12? So I'm going to set up my proportion. I know I have 20% out of 100. And it says 20% of what number? So the unknown is our of position. Is 12. So now I can solve. I can cross multiply and divide. And we do that setup, and you can solve for x. For number 2, Ms. McLean received 3% commission for selling a house at $95,000. How much money will she receive? So she received 3% for selling a house at $95,000. So this time we don't have all the words perfect for us, but we can still set up the proportion. We know she's getting 3%. So this side of the proportion we can put in right away. She's selling a house for $95,000. So you have to ask yourself, is that the part or is that the whole price? And this is the whole. The $95,000 is the cost of the house. So she's definitely not going to be making $95,000. She's going to be making 3%. So that's going to match with our part. What part of the $95,000 is she going to make? And so now we have the proportion set up, and now you can solve for x. Number 3, John received 1 mark for every correct answer on a test. He answered 48 questions correctly out of 80. What percent should he receive? So this one, because it's really common to our life right now, being in school, this one should be easy to set up. If we look at the question, it's asking us what percent should he receive, so we don't know the percentage. So that's what we're going to be solving for. But he answered 48 questions correctly out of 80. So we know that the 80 is the total. And the total is your whole. So he answered 48 out of 80 correctly. Now we can solve to find the percentage. Number 4 is a similar question, but worded a bit differently. Tim wrote a test and scored 80%. He answered 20 questions correctly. If each question was worth 1 mark, how many questions were on the test? So now we are talking about a test, but everything's switched around. So let's figure out what we know. We know he got 80%. So that's going to go on our percentage side. We know he answered 20 questions correctly. So therefore we know that there must be more questions on the test. So his part was 20. And so how many questions were on the test? Well, we need to figure that out. And that's going to be the maximum or the total. So that's going to be our unknown. So once we have the proportion set up, we can always cross multiply and divide, and we'll be able to solve. And in the next video, we're going to take a look at number 5, and we're going to solve that question in 2 ways.